All right. Mike DeCourcy is a senior writer for the Sporting News. He has written really thorough previews throughout all the different regions heading into March Madness. Hey, Mike, thanks for spending a minute.
Oh, happy to do it. Glad to be here.
I know you are busy, so I appreciate the time. Everybody right now around the water cooler, filling out their brackets, trying to figure out what's going to happen in what is expected to be a pretty volatile tournament based on how the regular season went. How do you think the selection committee did overall in terms of who they selected?
Well, I think when the committee leaves out a team, and it probably only happens about once every 5 years or so, that is definitely a quality tournament team that belongs in the field. And when they miss on that, it's not a question of an either or, but a team that absolutely belongs in. I think that one's a tough one to come back from. And they left out Rutgers without justification. Their justification, such as it is that they were poor after they lost a player, Mawat Mag, to injury. And I understand that if they had continued to perform at that level all the way through the Big Ten tournament, I think that would have been reasonable. I don't think Rutgers would have argued if they had played in the Big Ten tournament the way they had played for much of the time after Mawat got injured. But they were really good in Chicago. Played Michigan, a team that was fighting for its tournament survival and really handled the game well, and then played a number one seed in this NCAA tournament, Purdue, and were right there in the game the entire way. So that's a team that showed that it was a tournament team again, and their resume was impeccable relative to the back of the field. So for the committee to leave them out on the basis of the injury and then not punish anybody else that has significant injuries, whether it's Tennessee, Houston, UCLA, I'm in favor of not punishing teams for injuries. So I think they did fine there. But to single one team out and by excluding them, I thought was egregious, and for that reason, I give this committee a low grade.
So that's the most significant snub. Anybody else that comes to mind that you feel like deserves to be in there?
No, I think there's some question, and I think the committee has to sort of address this. Clemson had a year in which they did a lot of things to damage their own case, without a doubt. But they also defeated NC State, which made the field 3 times. And NC State's case was pretty thin. And I would like to know what it was that NC State accomplished that made them worthy of the field. If you look at them on their best days, do they look like a tournament team? Absolutely. They can play some great basketball. Well, why didn't they play more of it? I mean, they had a lot of opportunities to do so, and they failed to do that. So I would wonder about that, but I think you can find enough justification for leaving out Clemson that it's not a team that I would say really was wronged. For them, it was more of that either-or situation that I described. For Rutgers, it was, yes, they're a tournament team, but they haven't been one as much lately, so we're going to leave them out.
You know, on a larger note, Mike, kind of from the macro story here, the conference realignment that we have all talked about all year long has left the power in the hands of the mighty few. And so does the selection committee need to take a closer look at that after this tournament is over? I mean, it's really difficult for some of these fun Cinderella teams to get in without winning their conference tournaments outright. Is there enough parity in this group, in your opinion?
Well, I think we have to start with this. The fact that there are 68 teams in the field, there are 32 automatic bids, and about 8 or 9 of them come from, or 9 or 10 of them, I should say, come from leagues that often get multiple bids. The Atlantic 10 this year did not have a great year, so they did not. So so you're looking at between 23 and 22 automatic bids that are available to mid-majors. It's basically a third of the field. The reality is the mid-majors do not have a third of the best players, coaches, or teams. So I think they get a pretty good deal. And they're the ones who decide that we're going to send our conference tournament champion. You could be 18-0 in your league like Oral Roberts was, and then have a bad day and lose and maybe not get in. That's their decision. They could say, you know what, Oral Roberts, 18-0, get on the plane, you're going. That's up to them. So I do think there are times, and it's happened a few times in recent years. Monmouth in 2017 or 2016, they had a team that had beaten Notre Dame, Georgetown, and Southern California, dominated their league, but lost a couple of road games to teams in their league that weren't great. were ranked low in the various metrics, so they took them out. That was rough. And I think I've always said that the committee should understand what dominance means, what a Charleston winning 30 games, what a Florida Atlantic winning 30 games means relative to their accomplishment. And those teams often do well in this field. I had a thing I wrote about 15 years ago. I called it the 801 Club. If you win more than 80% of your games, whether you're Kansas or whether you're Florida Atlantic, you tend to do really well in this tournament. And so I think the committee can do more with those teams that are absolutely a high-end dominant, but teams that do well in their league but not extraordinary and then lose in a conference tournament, I think they get a fair deal, and their real argument is with their own league structure.
Yeah, it's fair analysis. When you look at a team like Alabama this season that they've had, the controversy that has been surrounding them has left a mark, a stain on this. I mean, how do you think that they are going to be received in this tournament?
Well, I'll tell you, the first weekend they're going to be received great because they're playing in Birmingham, so they'll get lots of love there. I think when they get to Louisville, and I expect that they will, I think they got a very comfortable draw, as comfortable as this tournament will allow it to be. I think that when they get to Louisville, it will somewhat depend on the identity of the other three teams, but I think that it won't be positive, and I don't think it'll be great in Houston either. But I understand why fans would feel the way they do. I wrote multiple columns about this and have talked about this in various forums for the 2-3 weeks that we've had this circumstance out there. I don't think Alabama handled any of this well. Not from the very beginning of it to the revelations from the hearing that occurred in Tuscaloosa a few weeks ago, as well as that were confirmed by Brandon Miller's own attorney. I don't think that Alabama has handled this gracefully at all. And so as long as it's within the boundaries of good taste, I think a feeling of antipathy for Alabama as a basketball team is a reasonable position for other fans to take.
And they face scathing criticism. I mean, from you, from the media at large, many TV outlets kind of just asking the questions of why this was handled the way that it was. As far as them being able to compartmentalize and win on the court, I know you wrote in your preview that it would be ludicrous to think that they wouldn't make it to the Final Four just based on the talent that they have. I mean, it seems like this is going to be a tough bracket to pick for those who want to kind of make their selections around the water cooler. But is Alabama pretty much as close to a lock as you can get, assuming, they don't fall apart?
In this tournament, I think so, because I think their region is, as I mentioned, a comfortable region. That most of the good teams that are the higher seeded teams that are in their corner of the bracket are teams that are having what I call less than seasons. You look at a Creighton or an Arizona, and it seems like that should be a really good team. And for various reasons, I think for Arizona lately, it's been injury related. Creighton, they've not been able to quite find their fastball. If you look at them, they've got a terrific center. They've got a veteran point guard. They've got wings who can shoot and drive the basketball. Why aren't they better? And I can't put a finger on it. And that seems to be a lot of this region. Alabama had that little period where a lot of their players, subsequent to the hearing and the controversy that developed, a lot of their players seemed to struggle with where the program or the team stood, while Brandon Miller continued to excel. But they've got to Nashville in the SEC tournament over last weekend, and they were phenomenal. They were just dominant. Each of their games was reasonably one-sided. Mizzou kind of hung in the best, but they were very good teams that they were taking out. Texas A&M barely in the game. Mizzou, Alabama was phenomenal in Nashville. So I have much less concern about their ability to focus on playing basketball right now than I might have 2 or 3 weeks ago.
The West seems to be a pretty different story. I mean, you've got Kansas there and not in the Midwest, which I don't know if that was surprising to you. But as you evaluate the West region, it seems like that is going to be particularly combustible.
Yeah, I think to an extent, if I describe the South as the less than region, I look at the West region as the more than region. Kansas, which plays with a 6'7" center, and yet is able to compete with teams with multiple big men. UCLA, which lost one starter to injury and then played their championship game without a second starter who was hurt in the semifinal. And they really gutted it out and nearly won the game on Saturday against Arizona. That's been the story of most of the good teams in this region. So I would not want to be, say, Kansas in the West right now, because they not only got denied the opportunity to play in Kansas City, which are opportunity that they earned. I've had people say, well, they shouldn't have that advantage. If that's the standard you want to have, nobody gets to be close, I'm all for it. I believe this should be a totally neutral tournament. But they have trended toward, over the last 2 decades, they want everybody as close to home as possible. Well, in that case, then they really botched this one, because Kansas played about 22 games against high-end NCAA tournament teams, and Houston played 6. And Kansas won about 2/3 of theirs. Well, Houston won 4, about 2/3. If that's the difference, if that's the difference, one team plays nearly its entire season against NCAA tournament teams, and the other one plays 6 games. How do you judge one to be superior to the other? I mean, I found that to be an absurd decision. And if I were a bar owner or a KU fan and I had the chance to drive up the street to see my team at the Sprint Center and now that's gone, I would not be pleased.
Yeah, seems like a misstep. And to another point that you touched on in your preview, has Houston played enough quality basketball to set themselves up to be successful, or could they potentially be in line for something of an upset here?
Well, the one thing I will say is that I am not really a big believer in battle tested. And I think that we have seen over the years teams that are exceptional, the Memphis teams of the late 2000s with Derrick Rose and that group, they got into the NCAA tournament having played maybe a couple of they played tough non-conference games, but in their league, maybe Tulsa was really good at a time, but they didn't have a lot of league competition after multiple teams left Conference USA for the Big East. And they still went into the NCAA tournament and did really well. They made the Elite Eight in 2006. They made the championship game 2008 and the Sweet 16 in 2009. So that wasn't a problem for them. It's never been a problem for Gonzaga, which has St. Mary's, now BYU, but it hasn't affected them at all. They've made 7 consecutive Sweet 16s, one of the longest streaks in the history of the tournament. So that's, I don't think, a real problem for them. But the problem is, how is Marcus Sasser? Marcus Sasser is an All-American guard, scores 18 a game, 17 a game, capable of scoring more than that when it's needed. And he made a wrong move with his lower leg, tweaked his groin, and we don't know how bad that is. And so we don't know what they're going to be when this tournament starts. And I can tell you from having watched them against Memphis in the American Championship game, that was a team that was looking for a path. They really were not comfortable without him. Maybe they can put it back together in 4 days and be back to themselves, even if he's not there, or maybe he's able to play. But one of the reasons why I didn't select them out of that region was the fact that I just don't know how healthy he'll be for this tournament.
And I think you wrote as well that Indiana might be a little bit vulnerable potentially right out of the gate. Why do you feel that way?
Not so much Indiana, but a little bit, because they've been very inconsistent. They have 2 great players, but they've struggled to find lately a real consistent formula to be successful. They don't have a lot of depth. They've struggled sometimes with their perimeter shooting. And so as a result of that, they're a little bit vulnerable. And I suppose if they had played an ordinary 13 seed, that they could get through that. Kent State's not ordinary. They're the best of the 13s by far. They're probably good enough to be a 12 at least, but there are only 4 spots on the 12 line. And I don't have a problem with anybody that the committee put on the 12 line. I thought that they did the right thing there. It's just that Kent State's good enough to be higher. So it's going to be a tough game. I was really overwhelmed. They played a terrific Toledo team in the MAC championship, put 58 points on them in the second half of a close game. It was about nearly tied. I think it was a 1-point margin at halftime. Second half, Kent comes out literally unstoppable, 58 points. So Indiana's in for a really tough ride. I think they can win it, but it's really going to be a tough one in the first round.
Yeah, it should be an exciting first round game to watch. And then for Purdue's path to the Final Four, you got the sense that even when Purdue is ranked the top team in the country, that there was some vulnerability there. I mean, do they have a difficult path in your mind to reaching the Final Four?
Yeah, I think, first of all, having Duke as a 5 seed in their region is a tough game. And I think I think Duke is probably not only one of the most talented teams in the tournament, but certainly the most talented team in that region. They've got multiple first round picks on that team. Kyle Filipowski has been one of the best freshmen in the country. And if we voted for All-American based on February on, probably would have been fighting for a first team spot. He's just been phenomenal. So having to deal with that possibly in the Sweet 16 is a tough deal. Memphis, FAU is a 30-win team. Memphis just won the American Championship, so that's not great for the 8-9. Bottom of the field, Marquette, bottom of the bracket, I should say, Marquette won the Big East regular season and tournament championship and dominated Xavier in the title game. So all those teams are a threat to Purdue. And Purdue, in many ways, has not been the team for the last month that they were for the first 3. Their freshmen maybe got a little worn down. They have 2 freshmen who had been starting at guard, and one still does, Braden Smith, the point guard. They moved a veteran, Brandon Newman, into the starting lineup ahead of the other freshman, Fletcher Lawyer. But there's still the question of how much can they get out of their perimeter. Not much doubt about what they can get out of Zach Edey. He's been just ridiculously good. We named him the Sporting News Player of the Year at the end of the regular season, and he went out in the conference tournament and made us look good. Let's put it that way. He was phenomenal. So he's going to be a tough deal for anybody that plays him. But the perimeter players for Purdue have to step forward and perform better if they want this to last.
And I think a lot of people around my area here in New York City are actually pretty excited about this Iona-UConn matchup. If you love a chess match, a sort of X's and O's, if you're a fanatic in that sense, how compelling is this storyline?
Well, I think it's pretty cool. I mean, Rick Pitino's among the greatest coaches ever. And if you just divide out the in-game ability, he's right there with Larry Brown, as the best in-game strategists that we've seen. He's great at that. So he'll have a lot to deal with UConn. They have so many weapons, so much depth. They've got size with Adama Sanogo and Donovan Clingan. They've got great size. They've got multiple wing players that can really perform. It's going to be a real tough challenge for Rick, but if there's a coach out there who is up to it, he certainly would be the one.
I was going to say, is that enough for some sort of average Joes who are trying to fill out their brackets to maybe give Iona the benefit of the doubt?
Not for me, because I have UConn in the Final Four. So I would not want to see that happen based on the survival of my bracket, so to speak. I think UConn is terrific. When I did my bracket, I was looking very micro at each matchup. There's one factor that a lot of fans might not be aware of, that if you look at kenpom.com, KENPOM.com, it's a subscription site, but you can look at the front page for free, and he lists offensive and defensive efficiency ratings for every team in Division I. And in the time he's been doing it, in the 20 years he's been doing it, every single team that has won the championship finished in the top 20 in both of those categories, except for UConn 2014. That's the only exception to that rule. So that factor is really important if you want to win the entire thing. And when I got done with my bracket, I did not know this at the time. When I got done with my bracket, I looked at my Final Four. I had Alabama, Duke, Connecticut, and Texas, and I'm like, oh man, I'm going to go like 1 for 4 because Alabama will make it, but the others, it's not going to work. And then I looked at Ken's site. And I saw all 3 of my 4 Final Four teams are in that very select group that are currently top 20 in both categories. The only exception was Duke. So I think that I feel a little bit better about my Final Four at this point because of that effectiveness that UConn, that Texas, and Alabama all have at both ends of the floor.
I feel like Ken Palm, this is a very worthy shout out because this site has been around for a long time for loyalists, for those who are in the know. And it's almost like a must go to destination if you really want to try to get the edge in your bracket. I'm curious because I just want to keep you for a couple more minutes. I know you got to jump, Mike, but is there a St. Peter's in the field? I mean, who do you view as maybe a Cinderella that could have a run, not necessarily a Final Four team, but somebody that might pull off the upset?
Well, to be fair to me, like nobody saw St. Peter's coming last year, and I don't see it there. But of all the years in which I wouldn't be surprised if there were something like that, this would be a year, because this has been a season in which we were completely absent of great teams. I compare it often to 2014. I mentioned before about UConn winning it in with a lesser offensive team than usually is the case. That was a season in which we had one great team for 2.5 months of the season. Arizona in 2014 was genuinely great, undefeated through the first 2.5 months. And then one of their players, Brandon Ashley, broke his foot in a road game in the Pac-12. And all of a sudden they were just another very good team. They ended up making the Elite Eight, but losing. And that's kind of, we have this season without the Brandon Ashley. We never had a great team. And that's kind of, ended up that year with a number 7 seed UConn playing a number 8 seed Kentucky in the final game. So I would not be at all surprised to see the same thing happen this time. It has, you can find vulnerabilities in Kansas, in Duke, in Purdue, Houston, whomever. You can find vulnerabilities in all of them. And that's why it's hard to say who's going to make a run out of this group. The teams that I fear the most, I would have selected Oral Roberts beyond doubt to win their first game if they had been in any other spot except opposite Duke. I took Drake to beat Miami. That's one of the few. But I don't advance usually unless I really believe in a team and don't believe in their opponent. I rarely advance a double-digit seed to a round of 16 in my bracket, because if you miss on those, it's so damaging to the success of the bracket. But I would not be at all surprised if FAU came out and beat Memphis and then took out Purdue as well. Not at all. They're a 30-plus win team. They play fabulous basketball. They are a great perimeter shooting team. And if they get it going, it'll be hard for anybody to stop them.
You've given me a lot to think about, and I'm glad that I've recorded this so that I can stop down and kind of go back through each region and figure out where your mind is so that it helps my mind get into a better place, because this has been a very difficult bracket for me to fill out. Just lastly, it sounds like maybe, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, that you're the most confident with where Alabama is, the region that they're in, to get to the Final Four, to do what they're supposed to do. If that does happen, because I don't know if we'll have the luxury of speaking over the next couple of weeks, I know you're going to get really, really busy. How should we view a championship if Alabama can pull this off, given how difficult the last month has been?
Yeah, I think I've struggled with that, because I knew over the last couple of weeks, based on the bracket work I do for Fox Sports, I knew that they were going to be in Louisville, and that's a 2-hour drive for me. So that's the region I'll be covering. And I've been sitting there thinking, how do I cover that? How do I feel about that if that's the team that I'm writing about, if that's the team that ends up cutting down the nets? How will I feel about that? I've been really wrestling with that in my own mind relative to the likelihood that I would not only have to cover them in Louisville, but also, if I'm correct, then in Houston as well. I think it's going to be something that I think all of us who love the game are going to possibly have to come to grips with, and it's something that, honestly, my feeling about this was never that Brandon Miller should not continue to play college basketball based on what we're aware of. I was never in that position, but my position was also that the punishment shouldn't have been zero, because I've been around college basketball for 37 years, something like that, and covered teams day to day on a beat for about 15 of that. And I've seen players that were benched because they just had bad attitudes for a night or more. And yet for to have this occurrence and to not have to face any public consequence at all, I really struggled with that. That was the part that if they had suspended him for a few games, I don't think that people like me would have been writing not enough games. I think there's I don't know what the number is for what happened. I don't know what the number is. And so, but I know that the number is not 0. And so that was my feeling about it. And I think that if they hadn't settled on 0, that this tournament would have proceeded for them in a lot different manner. I think people would have moved toward the game itself and not continued to feel that other circumstance as a constant presence in quite the same way. Maybe it's better that they didn't handle it right so that we don't move on, because the young woman is gone and that should never have happened.
Yeah, I agree with you, particularly working in a news cycle where we forget all too soon the consequences of actions. And I mean, we certainly don't have time for it now, but it would lend itself to a fascinating discussion of where we sort of are as we take stock of what we expect from our athletes in the state of college basketball. I will be following along, Mike. I'll be very curious to see how you sort of process that real time as Alabama goes. But in the meantime, I know it's a busy couple of weeks, so I appreciate you spending a couple of minutes.
Oh, I was glad to do it. Thank you for having me.